Joining us now, NBC News foreign affairs analyst, Ambassador Dennis Ross. He is a counselor at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and a former senior director at the National Security Council, and retired Major John Spencer, chair of urban warfare studies at West Point's Modern War Institute. Ambassador, let me start with you. This agreement, tentative agreement, is still not finalized. What would still need to be worked out, and what could potentially upend this deal?
Well, let's look at this from two different standpoints. One is it still has to be approved by the Israeli cabinet, which I expect it will be. I think it will be because the Israeli military, the leadership of the Israeli military is in favor of this. And they're in favor of it because they feel a responsibility. Having allowed these people to be taken in the first place, they feel a responsibility to make sure that anybody who can be released will be released. So that's number one. Number two will be there's a sequence here. Hamas is supposed to be releasing about 12 hostages per day. So what happens if they don't release the full 12? Or what happens if they come back on day 2 or 3 and they say, look, we can't find the others? They make the claim, which I'm sure in this case could be true, that they don't have all the hostages. That's very convenient for them not to have all the hostages. I'm quite dubious that, in fact, they will consolidate. It serves their interest to be able to say, look, we need time. We may yet find it at this is supposed to be, I think, 4 days. Let's say on the 4th day, they come back and say, you know, we can get another 10, but we need more time to get them as a way to sort of extend this. So there is the risk from the Hamas factor. There's also the risk from, do they accuse Israel of not fully respecting the terms of this, either in terms of halting certain kinds of operations and or affecting the number of trucks that are actually coming in. Part of the problem with the trucks is every single one has to be inspected, so there's a bottleneck in terms of how many come through. So there's the different pieces of this. Each piece of this agreement opens itself up to possibly not being implemented or being seen or defined in different ways by each side.
Yeah, and Major, what do you see as the biggest logistical challenges to carrying out something like this?
Yeah, I mean, especially from an urban warfare perspective, when you have troops deep in urban terrain that will be told to basically halt movement, and then there are the particulars on that, as we already see IDF soldiers who have cleared areas being attacked from their rear. There are a lot of risks and challenges in this, but of course, both sides would have to fully communicate the adherence to the terms that the political apparatus has agreed to, but very challenging.
And Major, you know, and Gabe Gutierrez mentioned this a couple of times, there is the inclusion in this tentative deal of no drone flights over the Gaza Strip by Israel during this period. Why the importance of that? And it would seem as though those aren't essentially armed drone flights, although I presume they could be, but they're not participating in bombing. Why the importance for Hamas of not having drone flights?
I mean, without fully knowing, you have to assume that means that they want freedom of maneuver in unoccupied areas, as in places where the IDF aren't, or even to facilitate getting hostages from where they are to where the exchange will happen. Hamas wants a window of not just the stopping of fighting, but a window of freedom of movement in the areas where they are.
Can I just add to that?
Please do.
I was going to add to that. I think that the Hamas is concerned that the Israelis will track their leaders. Right now, they're pretty well hidden. I think during this period, it's not only that when they move hostages, they themselves may be moving, and they're worried about Israeli intelligence picking up their movements, knowing that they're targets for the Israelis. So even if they're not specifically targeted at this point, Israel will have better intelligence on where they may be, especially if they decide during the pause to move, and that's likely.
Yeah, and Ambassador, just wondering, what? Obviously, there's this huge benefit to the families, to those however many hostages can be released. We're day 45 since this massacre in Israel. I'm just wondering, Ambassador, are there any benefits to the state of Israel to continue having negotiations, either with a third party or elsewhere, with this organization going forward?
There's obviously a risk. The risk is you slow the momentum of their military campaign. There's also a risk that the idea of sort of normalizing contacts becomes part of the environment, and there'll be a larger argument then made for a ceasefire. The end result of this war, from the Israeli standpoint, is Hamas cannot be in control of Gaza any longer. Doesn't mean every Hamas person is no longer there, but it means they've lost their military coherence, their organizational coherence, their military wherewithal, and their ability politically to
Ambassador
control.
Ross and John Spencer, I apologize. Let's go right to President Biden.